If your own family sat you down in a glass tower and voted you out of your future, would you leave in tears or quietly flip the switch, keeping their empire alive? They called me a burden in front of 20 people by sundown. The only reason their company still existed was because I had not yet decided to pull my money out. They thought they were saving money, but they really just fired their only funding source. My name is Tessa Calder, and right now, I am staring at the grain of a mahogany table that costs more than most people's cars. The air in the room is recycled, filtered, and chilled to a temperature that keeps everyone alert and uncomfortable. This is the main conference room of Calder & Rowe Holdings, perched on the 42nd floor of a glass needle stuck into the heart of the city skyline. From here, the cars down on the avenue look like toys, and the people are invisible. It is a view designed to make you feel like a god, or at least a king. But today, it just feels like a courtroom. I am 34 years old. I am sitting in a leather chair that is slightly too big for me, flanked by people who share my DNA, but none of my reality. At the head of the table sits my father, Landon Calder. He is not wearing his father face today. He is wearing his CEO face. It is a mask of tanned skin and silver hair, built on a foundation of $900 million in real estate assets. He taps a gold pen against a leather-bound folio. The sound is rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. It sounds like a judge's gavel hitting a block of wood in slow motion. To his right sits my mother, Elaine. Her posture is perfect, her spine a straight line of moral support for her husband. She refuses to look at me. She is staring at a flower arrangement in the center of the table, a violent spray of birds of paradise, as if it is the most fascinating thing she has ever seen. Then there are the boys, my brothers. Grant, the executive vice president, is checking his watch. Elliot, the CFO, is scrolling through something on his tablet, his face illuminated by the blue light of spreadsheets. Nolan, the director of project development, is cracking his knuckles under the table. They are the pillars of the Calder empire, the golden suns, and I am the crack in the foundation. "Let us get started," my father says. His voice is a low rumble that usually commands boardrooms and charity galas. Today, it is directed solely at me. "This is an emergency meeting of the voting members of the Calder Family Trust. You all have the agenda." I do not open the folder in front of me. I know what is inside. It is an autopsy of my life. The lights in the room dim, and the projector hums to life. A screen descends from the ceiling, cutting off the view of the city. The first slide appears. It is titled, Contribution to Family Legacy, Q3 Performance Metrics. Grant clears his throat. He stands up, smoothing the front of his Italian suit. "As you can see," he says, using a laser pointer to circle a graph that climbs steeply upward. The commercial division is up 12% year over year. The Seaport deal alone brought in $40 million in liquid capital. My father nods. "Good work, Grant." Elliot goes next. He talks about tax mitigation strategies and debt restructuring. He uses words like synergy and optimization. He puts up a slide showing that he saved the company $4 million in operational costs last quarter. Then it is Nolan's turn. He talks about the new luxury condos in the fashion district, sold out before ground was even broken. The room is thick with testosterone and self-congratulation. They are high-fiving each other with their eyes. They are the winners. They are the Calders who matter. Then, the slide changes. The room goes silent. On the screen is a photo of me. It is 10 years old, taken at my business school graduation. I look young, hopeful, and stupid. Beneath the photo, there is no graph. There are no soaring arrows. There is just a list of bullet points in black text. Junior associate, Calder & Rowe, resigned after 4 months. Founder, Greenreach nonprofit, ceased operations after 18 months. Independent consultant, no verifiable long-term contracts. Current role, none. And at the bottom, in bold red text, annual trust distribution, $600,000. I feel the heat rise up my neck. but I force my face to remain a mask of bored indifference. I have practiced this face in the mirror. It is the only armor I have. This, Grant says, pointing the red laser dot right at my forehead in the photo, is the issue. We are running a business, not a charity, and yet we have a line item on our books that bleeds us for over $500,000 a year with zero return on investment. It is not just the money, Elliot adds, not looking up from his tablet. It is the optics. We are trying to bring in outside investors for the coastal expansion. When they do their due diligence, they see the trust structure. They see money flowing out to a beneficiary who brings nothing to the table. It looks like nepotism gone wrong. It looks like waste. I tried to make Greenreach work, I say quietly. My voice sounds small in the acoustic perfection of the room. The market shifted. Grant's dried up. You failed, Tessa, Nolan says. He says it casually, like he is commenting on the weather. You tried to save the whales or whatever it was, and you failed. Then you tried consulting, which is just code for being unemployed. Now you just exist. My father leans forward. The tapping of the pen stops. This family was built on production, he says. My grandfather laid bricks. I built towers. Your brothers are expanding the footprint. We carry our weight. He pauses, letting the silence stretch until it feels heavy enough to crush bones. We have reviewed the terms of the trust, my father continues. The bylaws allow the voting committee to amend beneficiary status based on a conduct and contribution clause. We have never used it before, but we have never had a situation like this before. He signals to the assistant in the corner, who clicks to the next slide. It is a wall of text. Effective immediately, my father reads. We are instituting a new standard for performance. To remain an active beneficiary of the Calder Family Trust, a member must meet one of the following criteria. He holds up 3 fingers. 1. Hold a senior management position within Calder and Rowe Holdings or its subsidiaries. He drops a finger. 2. Generate a verified independent annual income of at least $350,000. He drops the last finger. 3. Possess personal real estate or investment assets in their own name exceeding $3 million. I look at the numbers on the screen. $350,000. $3 million. They are arbitrary numbers. They are weapons. They know my tax returns. Or they think they do. They know I report an income of maybe $40,000 from random consulting gigs. They know I rent an apartment. They know I drive a 5-year-old sedan. This criteria was not written to encourage me. It was written to amputate me. Dad, I say, this is ridiculous. You know I don't have $3 million in assets. Then get a job, Tessa, Grant snaps. A real one, not your little hobbies. It is time to cut the cord, Elliot says. We are carrying dead weight. If we want to secure the financing for the hotel chain, we need to show we are lean. We need to trim the fat. Is that what I am? I ask, looking directly at my mother. Fat to be trimmed? My mother finally turns her head. Her eyes are blue ice. She looks tired, or maybe just bored of the drama. Oh, Tessa, she sighs. Don't be dramatic. Your father is trying to help you. You have been drifting for a decade. Sometimes you need a push. Tough love is still love, darling. Tough love. That is what they call it when they strip you of your security in a room that smells like lemon polish and money. I have the motion on the floor, my father says. His voice is devoid of emotion. He is closing a deal. The motion is to remove Tessa Calder from the list of active beneficiaries, suspending all monthly stipends and access to trust capital, effective immediately, until such time as she meets the performance criteria. He looks around the table. All in favor? Grant's hand shoots up. Aye. Elliot's hand follows. Aye. Nolan raises his hand, smirking at me. Aye. My mother raises her hand gracefully, like she is hailing a cab. Aye. My cousin Lauren, from marketing, nods and raises her hand. Aye. My Uncle Marcus raises his hand. Sorry, Tessa. Business. My eyes drift to the end of the table. To Naomi, my cousin. She is 26, the youngest in the room besides me. She runs the charitable foundation arm, the small guinea box they put the women in. Naomi knows how hard I worked on my nonprofit. She knows how many nights I stayed up writing grant proposals. Naomi looks at me. Her hand stays on the table. She bites her lip. Naomi, my father says. It is not a question. It is a command. He stares at her, his eyebrows drawing together in a flat line of pressure. Naomi flinches. She looks at my father, then at Grant, then down at her hands. She is terrified. If she votes no, she is next. She knows it. I know it. Slowly, shakily, Naomi raises her hand. Aye, she whispers. The motion carries, my father says. He closes the folio with a definitive snap. The legal team has the paperwork ready. It will be filed by end of business today. He looks at me then. Really looks at me. He is expecting tears. He is expecting me to beg. He is expecting the tantrum of a spoiled princess who just lost her allowance. I feel a coldness settle in my chest. It is not the numbness of shock. It is the temperature of absolute clarity. It feels like ice water replacing my blood. I look at Grant, who is already checking his phone. I look at Elliot, who is smiling at a spreadsheet. I look at my father, who thinks he has just taught me a lesson about value. They have absolutely no idea what they have just done. They think they are cutting off a leech. They do not realize they are severing the artery that feeds them. I do not cry. I do not scream. I just nod. Once. Okay, I say. My father blinks. Okay? I understand, I say. I push the chair back and stand up. My legs are steady. You have made a business decision based on the data you have. It is for your own good. Tessa, my mother says, reaching out as if to pat my arm, but stopping short. You will thank us in a few years. I look at the clock on the wall. It is 1:10 in the afternoon. Maybe, I say. I pick up my purse. I leave the folder with my humiliating resume on the table. I do not need it. I know exactly who I am. I turn and walk toward the double glass doors. My heels click against the marble floor. Click, click, click. Tessa, my father calls out, his voice slightly confused by my lack of hysterics. We can discuss a transition plan, perhaps a small severance to help you. No need, I say, not looking back. You were very clear, effective immediately. I wouldn't want to be a burden for 1 minute longer. I push open the doors and step out into the hallway. The air out here is cooler. I walk to the elevator and press the button for the garage. As the doors slide shut, cutting off the view of the Calder Empire, I finally let myself smile. It is not a nice smile. I check the time again, 1:12 in the afternoon. I have less than 4 hours before the banks close. Less than 4 hours before the paperwork hits the lawyers' desks. Less than 4 hours to teach my family the difference between price and value. The elevator begins its descent, dropping fast, but my stomach doesn't lurch. For the first time in my life, I am the one controlling the gravity. The silence that followed the final vote was heavy, but it was not the weight of guilt. It was the heavy, suffocating satisfaction of people who believed they had just completed a necessary amputation. My father, Landon, closed the leather folio with a finality that echoed off the glass walls. He looked at me, waiting for the crack in my composure. He wanted the tears. He wanted the scene that would justify his label of me as emotional dead weight. I did not give it to him. Instead, I remained seated for 1 precise second longer than social cues dictated. I smoothed the fabric of my skirt. When I spoke, my voice was devoid of the tremor they were all listening for. Just for the sake of clarity, I said, looking directly at the expensive Swiss watch on Grant's wrist. What is the precise effective time of this termination? The question threw the room off balance. My mother blinked, her perfect mascara remaining undisturbed, but her mouth tightened. Grant frowned. Looking from me to our father, they were prepared for begging. They were prepared for anger. They were not prepared for administrative queries. Landon cleared his throat, regaining his CEO composure. It is effective immediately. Tessa, do not try to find a loophole. I am not looking for a loophole, I corrected him, my tone flat. I am looking for a timestamp. When, exactly, does my access to the trust portal expire? When are the documents filed with the state? The legal team has instructions to file everything before close of business, Landon said, his voice sharpening. 5 o'clock? By 5 o'clock today, you are officially severing ties with the financial infrastructure of this family. Your access to the portal will be revoked at that exact minute. 5 o'clock, I repeated. Good to know. I stood up then. The movement was fluid. The vibration in my pocket had been constant for the last 20 minutes, a rhythmic buzzing against my thigh that I had pointedly ignored. I knew exactly who was calling. I knew why they were calling, and I knew that the people sitting around this table, who prided themselves on their market omniscience, were deaf to the alarm bells ringing in my pocket. I picked up my purse. I did not look at Naomi, who was staring at the table as if she wished she could dissolve into the wood. I looked at my brothers. Grant looked smug. Elliot looked bored. Nolan looked like he had just won a bet. You have all just made a very large business decision, I said, pausing to catch each of their gazes. Based on very missing data, I respect that. Pain is usually the most efficient teacher. I turned and walked out. I did not slam the door. The hydraulic hinge hissed softly, sealing the sound of their confusion inside. The walk to the elevator bank felt like swimming through cold water. My heart was not racing. It was beating with a slow, heavy thud. I pressed the down button. The door slid open instantly, revealing a mirrored interior that reflected a woman who looked nothing like the failure described in that conference room. As soon as the doors closed, sealing me in a steel box dropping toward the earth, I pulled my phone out. 3 missed calls, all from Liam Porter. Liam was the senior vice president of commercial lending at North Stone Harbor Bank. He was not a man who called 3 times unless the building was on fire or a deal was dying on the table. I hit redial. He answered on the first ring. Ms. Calder, Liam said, his voice tight. I was about to call your other line. We have a situation. I am listening. Liam, I said. I watched the floor numbers tick down. 30, 29, 28. Your father's office just sent over the formal drawdown request for the Coastal View Hotel project. Liam said, the full amount. They want access to the entire $250 million credit facility by tomorrow morning. They are rushing the closing. I let out a short, dry laugh. Of course they were. That was why the vote happened today. They wanted to clean up the books, remove the burden of my stipend, and present a leaner, more profitable front before they took on $250 million in debt. They are aggressive, I said. They are reckless, Liam corrected. But that is not the problem. The problem, Tessa, is the guarantor. I leaned back against the cool metal of the elevator wall. Remind me of the terms, Liam. The primary borrower is Calder and Rowe, Liam recited, the sound of typing audible in the background. But Calder and Rowe is leveraged to the hilt on the Midtown expansion. The bank would never have approved this facility without a third-party guarantor with liquid assets exceeding $100 million. And who is the guarantor of record? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Marisol Ridge Holdings, Liam said. The name hung in the air between us. Marisol Ridge, the company I had named after the street my grandmother grew up on. The company that my father and brothers assumed was a private equity firm run by faceless investors in Connecticut, or maybe Zurich. They had never dug deep enough to see who signed the papers. They just saw the money, and they took it. And they are assuming Marisol is still on board? I asked. They just sent the certification, Liam said. Grant signed it. He certified that all guarantor conditions remain unchanged. The elevator hit the parking garage level with a soft chime. The doors opened to the smell of concrete and gasoline. Liam, I said, stepping out into the shadows of the garage. What does the contract say about the guarantor's right to withdraw? The guarantor can withdraw support for any future drawdowns with written notice, Liam said immediately. He knew the contract as well as I did. If the guarantor withdraws, the bank has the right to freeze the facility immediately, and since the facility has a cross-default clause, it would trigger a review of their other outstanding loans. And who has the authority to issue that notice for Marisale Ridge? I asked, unlocking my car. It was a silver sedan, sensible, nondescript, the kind of car a failure drives. You do, Liam said. Only you. You are the sole managing member. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door. The silence of the car was absolute. They just voted to cut me off. Liam, I said quietly. They gave me until 5 o'clock today. They think they are saving $600,000 a year. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Liam Porter was a smart man. He did not need a diagram to understand what was happening. My God, Liam breathed. They do not know, do they? They have no idea, I said. Hold the drawdown. Liam, do not process a single cent. I need to review my legal standing. If they want to play by the strict letter of the law, we are going to give them a lesson in literacy. Understood, Liam said. His voice had shifted. He was no longer speaking to a client. He was speaking to a commander. I will flag the file as pending internal review. That gives us 24 hours before we have to give them a formal reason. Thank you, Liam. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. It immediately buzzed again. I picked it up, an email notification. Sender, Blukey Stratagem Group, subject, urgent, capital call request, Calder Project Alpha. I tapped it open. Blukey was a boutique investment fund I had started 5 years ago with the proceeds from a tech buyout. I owned 60% of the voting shares. My partners were silent. To the world, Blukey was an aggressive, high-yield debt fund. To my family, they were just another source of cash. The email was from the fund manager, forwarding a request from Elliot. Tessa, we just received a request from Elliot Calder for an emergency injection of $120 million for the mezzanine financing on the new tower. He is offering 12% interest. He says the family balance sheet is cleaner than ever, as of this afternoon. Do we proceed? Cleaner than ever, because they had erased me. I stared at the screen. Elliot was trying to plug a hole in their cash flow by borrowing from me at 12% interest, to replace the trust money he had just cut off. The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. Another email popped up, this one from Elmsway Arcadia Partners. Elmsway was a vendor financing firm. I had bought a controlling stake 3 years ago when the original owner wanted to retire. We financed the materials, the steel, the glass, the concrete, for major construction firms, including Calder and Rowe. Subject, credit term adjustment request. From Nolan Calder, message. We are looking to extend our payment terms from 30 days to 90 days on the current lumber contracts. Cash flow is being reallocated to the hotel acquisition. Please confirm approval. I lowered the phone. I sat there in the dim light of the parking garage, surrounded by the concrete pillars that held up the glass tower above me. My family was upstairs, drinking scotch, congratulating themselves on trimming the fat. They thought they stood on a mountain of their own making. They were wrong. They were standing on a scaffold, and I owned every single bolt. I checked the dashboard clock. It was 1:32 in the afternoon. 1 hour and 20 minutes ago. I had been the burden, the disappointment, the daughter who needed to be cut loose to save the bottom line. Now, as I put the car in reverse, the reality settled over me like a coat of armor. I had less than 4 hours until 5 o'clock, 4 hours until their paperwork went through, 4 hours until I was officially a stranger to the Calder Family Trust. They wanted to separate the business from the family? Fine. I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would treat them like a business. And in business, when you fire your primary investor, you do not get to keep their money. I pulled out of the parking spot, the tires squealing softly on the polished concrete. I was not going home to cry. I was going home to work. I had calls to make. I had levers to pull. The burden was about to become the gravity that brought the whole sky down. The drive to my apartment took 20 minutes, and my heart rate slowed with every mile I put between myself and the Calder Tower. My building is not the kind of place a Calder usually lives. It is in the Arts District, a converted industrial space with exposed brick and pipes that my mother calls charming but unfinished. It does not have a doorman with white gloves. It does not have a private elevator. To my family, this apartment is proof of my mediocrity. They think I rent it because I cannot afford the skyline views in the financial district. They are wrong. I own the building. I bought it 4 years ago through a holding company called Ironwood Realty. My family pays rent on a storage unit in the basement for their overflow files. And every month, a check for $4,000 travels from Calder and Rowe's accounts receivable department into an account that eventually feeds my investment portfolio. They are literally paying my mortgage while mocking my lifestyle. I unlocked the door to Unit 4B and stepped inside. It was quiet. The air smelled like vanilla and old paper. I dropped my keys on the console table and walked past the modest living room, the IKEA sofa, the second-hand coffee table, and went straight to the second bedroom. This is where the mask comes off. I punched the code into the keypad on the door handle. The lock clicked open. Inside, there is no IKEA furniture. The room is dominated by a custom-built teak desk that spans the entire far wall. 3 curved monitors were already glowing in standby mode. On the wall to the left, a massive whiteboard was covered in a spiderweb of diagrams, red and black marker strokes mapping out cash flows, maturity dates, and leverage ratios. This room is the cockpit of a stealth bomber. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and woke up the screens. The familiar blue and black of the Bloomberg terminal flickered to life on the center monitor. On the left screen, my portfolio dashboard loaded. Total asset value, $912 million. I stared at the number. It always felt unreal. Even though I had built it dollar by dollar, I looked up at the small, silver-framed photograph sitting on the corner of the desk. It was the only personal item in the room. An older woman with sharp eyes and a tight smile, holding a cigarette like a scepter. Grandma Evelyn, my mother's mother, the black sheep of her own generation. She was the only one who saw me. When she died 7 years ago, she bypassed my mother entirely and left me her personal rainy day fund. $2.5 million? It was a lot of money. But in the world of high finance, it was a rounding error. To the Calders, $2.5 million was the price of a vacation home in Aspen. But Evelyn had left a note with the check. Don't let anyone know what you have, Tessa, not until you need them to fear you. Money screams, but wealth whispers. I took that money and I went underground. I closed my eyes, letting the memory of 7 years ago wash over me. It was the lowest point of my life. My nonprofit, Greenreach, had just collapsed. I had tried to create sustainable urban gardens, and I had failed because I didn't understand supply chains. I was raw, humiliated, and sitting at Sunday dinner while Grant and Nolan made jokes about organic failure. I could have taken my trust fund allowance, that $600,000 a year they threw at me like hush money, and spent it on clothes and trips to Bali. I could have become the socialite they expected me to be. Instead, I went back to school. Not officially. I didn't enroll. I just went to the offices of my old professors, the ones who taught advanced derivatives and forensic accounting. I asked them how to build a ghost ship. We set up the structure, a web of LLCs and trusts, all registered in Delaware or Nevada, all nesting dolls hiding the true owner. The flagship was Marysail Ridge Holdings, named after the street Evelyn grew up on. I started small. I looked at the deals my father threw in the trash. 6 years ago, Grant laughed at a pitch from a company developing software to track HVAC efficiency in large skyscrapers. Boring, he had called it. Pennies on the dollar. I did the math. The software wasn't sexy, but it was sticky. Once a building installed it, they never took it out. I used Evelyn's money to buy 20% of the company for a song. 2 years later, Calder and Rowe mandated that software for all their buildings to meet new green energy compliance codes. I remembered signing the contract on my end, sitting in this very chair in my pajamas. My father signed the check that sent $300,000 of profit into my account, and he never knew he was paying his daughter. That was the first hit. It was addictive. I became obsessed with the plumbing of the industry. My brothers wanted to build the shiny glass towers. I wanted to own the companies that leased them the cranes, the firms that insured the glass, and the logistics networks that delivered the steel. I lived on $100,000 a year. The other $500,000 from my trust distribution? I invested every cent. I reinvested every dividend. I compounded my interest like a religious practice. While my brothers were buying Porsches and upgrading their watches, I was buying distressed debt. When a supplier for the company was about to go under, I would swoop in through Elmsway Arcadia Partners, buy their debt for 40 cents on the dollar, and restructure it. Suddenly, the supplier wasn't answering to a bank. They were answering to me. And because I wanted Calder and Rowe to succeed, after all, they were my biggest customer, I made sure the supplies kept moving. I became the invisible safety net beneath their tightrope act. There was one moment, about 4 years ago, when I almost broke. I was in the car with my father. We were driving back from a funeral for a great aunt. The company was going through a liquidity crunch. Payroll was tight, and the banks were getting nervous about a stalled project in Chicago. I had spent the previous night awake, maneuvering funds through 3 different holding companies to purchase a block of bonds that would stabilize the company's credit rating. I had essentially injected $5 million of my own liquidity to stop the bleeding. I looked at his profile, the stress lines around his eyes, the way his hand gripped the steering wheel. I wanted him to be proud of me. I wanted to say, "Dad, it's okay. I fixed it. I'm not just the girl who failed at gardening. I understand the game." "Dad," I had started, my voice trembling with the anticipation of his approval. About the credit rating issue. I was looking at the bond structure, and I think he didn't even turn his head. He just held up a hand to silence me. "Not now, Tessa," he said, his voice sharp with irritation. "Elliot is calling. He has a strategy for debt optimization that I need to hear. This is grown-up business." He took the call. He spent 20 minutes praising Elliot for a strategy that only worked because I had secretly bought the bonds that made it possible. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, and I felt something inside me click shut. It was the final lock on the vault. If they wanted me to be the child, I would be the child. I would be the silent, unassuming daughter who needed help with her rent. I would let them condescend to me. I would let them lecture me on fiscal responsibility while I quietly bailed out their mistakes. That silence became my power. As the years passed, the banks started to notice. They saw that whenever a Calder deal got shaky, a mysterious institutional investor would step in to provide mezzanine financing or act as a guarantor. Northstone Harbor Bank didn't care that Marisail Ridge was run by a woman in a second bedroom. They only cared that Marisail Ridge had perfect credit and liquid assets that grew by 18% annually. "We need a strong third party," the loan officers would tell my father. "Someone with a clean balance sheet." And my father, desperate to close the deal, would accept the terms. He would sign contracts with Marisail Ridge, never asking who was behind the curtain. He assumed it was old money. He assumed it was Wall Street. He never assumed it was the girl he voted off the island this morning. I looked back at the screen. The diagram of the Calder empire was overlaid with my own holdings. Red lines connected Calder and Rowe to my companies. I owned the debt on the crane equipment for the Midtown Tower. I held the controlling stake in the firm that managed their building security. I was the primary guarantor for the $250 million credit facility they were trying to draw down today. I was the silent partner in the Blue K fund that Elliot was currently begging for cash. They thought they were standing on solid ground. They didn't realize that I was the ground. I picked up a dry erase marker and walked over to the whiteboard. I drew a circle around Calder Family Trust. Then I drew a line through it. For 7 years, I had built a fortress to protect them from their own arrogance. I had let them treat me like a liability while I acted as their asset. I looked at the leather chair reflected in the dark monitor of the side screen. It was just an office chair, but it was paid for with my own money. "They called me a burden," I whispered to the empty room. I thought about the chairs they sat in this morning. the mahogany table, the lights overhead. "I paid for the table you sat at to fire me," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I paid for the electricity that powered the projector you used to humiliate me. And I paid for the very air conditioning that kept you cool while you sweated over your greed." I capped the marker. The cap made a sharp snap in the quiet room. "You want to remove the burden?" I asked the ghost of my father. "Be careful. Sometimes the burden is the only thing holding up the roof." I turned back to my desk. It was time to make the first call. It was time to let the roof creak. I clicked the execute command on my customized portfolio management software, and the center screen flickered from a standard spreadsheet view into a complex visualization mode. This was not a feature that came with the standard Bloomberg terminal package. This was something I had paid a developer in Silicon Valley $50,000 to build specifically for me 2 years ago. I called it the Vitals Monitor. On the screen, a digital map of the Calder Empire bloomed against a black background. In the center was a large, pulsing gray node labeled Calder and Rowe Holdings. It looked solid, immovable, the gravitational center of my family's ego. But radiating out from it were dozens of smaller nodes, subsidiaries, shell companies, vendor partnerships, and capital sources, and connecting them all were lines of varying thickness and color. It looked like a nervous system, and as I adjusted the filters to show beneficial ownership via Tessa Calder entities, the map lit up like a Christmas tree in hell. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the web of leverage I had spent 7 years spinning. The lines colored in deep crimson represented debt obligations where I was the guarantor or the primary lender. There was a thick red artery connecting the central node to Northstone Harbor Bank. That was the $250 million credit facility for the Coastal Hotel project. My name was not on the bank's website, but it was on the bottom of the risk assessment file in Liam Porter's safe. If I severed that artery, the hotel deal would die of hypoxia within 48 hours. I moved my mouse to a cluster of blue nodes on the left. These were the private bonds, specifically, the Series B corporate bonds that Blue Key Stratagem Group had purchased over the last 3 years. I clicked on the node, and the details cascaded down the side of the screen. Total value, $60 million. Status, callable. Covenant breach trigger. Change in guarantor status. My brothers thought Blue Key was a group of aggressive hedge fund managers from Connecticut. They treated Blue Key with respect because they feared the interest rates. They did not know that the aggressive manager was their little sister, and that I could demand immediate repayment of that $60 million if I could prove, and I could, that the company's risk profile had materially changed. I shifted my focus to the orange nodes scattered around the periphery. These were the vendors, the operational lifeblood. One node pulsed rhythmically. Elmsway Arcadia Partners. Elmsway was a boring company. It financed invoices for construction materials, steel beams, industrial glass, commercial-grade concrete. When Calder and Rowe ordered steel for a skyscraper, they didn't pay cash. They used trade credit financed by Elmsway. Current outstanding financing, $90 million. Owner of Elmsway Arcadia Partners. Me. I stared at the screen, tracing the orange line back to the center. If Elmsway froze the credit line, the truck stopped rolling, the cranes stopped turning, the construction sites would go silent, and the union penalties alone would bankrupt the project budgets in a month. But there was more. I toggled the view to equity and control. A new set of green lines appeared. These were the ones that scared me the most, because they were permanent. I owned 35% of CNR Logistics, the subsidiary that handled all the physical transport for the family projects. I had bought it through a shell company when my father wanted to offload low-margin assets 4 years ago. I held 42% of the voting stock in Calder Asset Management, a spin-off company that held the deeds to our completed residential buildings. That 42% gave me veto power over any asset sale exceeding $5 million. My father thought he controlled that board because the other shareholders were passive. He did not know I was the one keeping them passive. And then there were the convertible bonds. I had a drawer full of them, millions of dollars in debt that I could, at a moment's notice, Convert into equity in the parent company. If I converted everything today, I wouldn't just be a creditor, I would be a significant minority shareholder. I could walk into the next board meeting not as a daughter, but as a partial owner. The power was intoxicating, but as I looked at the map, the cold rage in my stomach began to mix with something heavier, responsibility. I zoomed in on the central node. If I pulled every lever right now, if I called the loans, froze the vendor credit, and revoked the guarantees, Calder and Rowe would not just stumble, it would implode. I thought about the receptionists on the 20th floor who had been there since I was a child. I thought about the site managers, the guys in hard hats who had mortgages and kids in college. I thought about the terrifying ripple effect of a $900 million collapse. I was angry, I was furious, but I was not an arsonist. I cannot burn the house down, I said aloud to the empty room. I just need to change the locks. I picked up the stylus and began to mark the screen, categorizing my leverage into two groups: kill and squeeze. The hotel deal? That was a vanity project for Grant. That was a kill. I would block the $250 million. The payroll accounts? Those were a squeeze. I would keep the cash flowing for salaries, but I would tighten the reporting requirements so much that Elliot would have to ask my permission to buy a stapler. The expansion into the Asian market? Kill. The maintenance contracts for existing buildings? Squeeze. I was acting like a surgeon cutting out a tumor, except the tumor was my family's arrogance, and the patient was the company I had secretly been keeping alive. A notification pinged on my email client, breaking my concentration. I minimized the map and opened the mail app. The sender was Jared Mills. I knew Jared. He was a mid-level accounting manager at Calder and Rowe. Nice guy. Overworked. He was the one who actually did the math that Elliot took credit for. The subject line was, "Compliance question regarding Marisale Ridge entity." I opened the email. 2. Authorized representative, Marisale Ridge Holdings. From Jared Mills. Accounts payable, Calder and Rowe. Good afternoon. We are finalizing the documentation for the coastal drawdown scheduled for tomorrow. The bank's compliance officer just flagged a minor discrepancy in the guarantor file. They require a current beneficial ownership form for Marisale Ridge Holdings to be on file before the funds can release. We do not seem to have the updated form in our internal system. Could you please forward the current ownership structure or direct me to the principal so we can get this signed? Grant is pushing to have this cleared by close of business. Best regards. Jared. I stared at the words, "Direct me to the principal." Jared was just doing his job. He assumed Marisale was some faceless investment vehicle. He was asking the void for a signature, assuming the void would spit one back out just like it always did. This was it, the moment the veil dropped. I could ignore it. I could let them panic for a few hours, but that felt petty. I needed them to know exactly what wall they had just run into. I hit reply. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I did not need to be rude. I did not need to be emotional. Facts were sharper than insults. 2. Jared Mills. C.C. Landon Calder, Grant Calder, Elliot Calder, Liam Porter, Northstone Bank. Subject: Compliance. Question regarding Marisale Ridge entity. Dear Jared, you are correct that the beneficial ownership form needs to be accurate for the bank to proceed. Please be advised that there is no discrepancy. The ownership records are up to date. Marisale Ridge Holdings is 100% owned by Tessa Calder. Furthermore, as the sole managing member, I am currently reviewing all outstanding guarantee obligations attached to this entity. No further authorizations for debt or credit drawdowns will be signed until this review is complete. This includes the coastal hotel facility. All decisions regarding these guarantees will be revisited after close of business on Monday. Regards, Tessa Calder. Owner, Marisale Ridge Holdings. I read it once. It was professional. It was direct. It was a nuclear bomb wrapped in a business memo. I pressed send. The email whooshed away. I sat back in my chair. watching the seconds tick by on the digital clock in the corner of my screen. 1 second, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. It took exactly 45 seconds for the world to break. My phone, which I had placed face up on the desk, lit up. Incoming call. Landon Calder. I watched it ring. I did not touch it. The ringing stopped and immediately started again. Incoming call. Grant Calder. Then Elliot. Then the main switchboard of Calder and Rowe. The phone vibrated and danced across the mahogany surface of my desk like an angry beetle. They were panicking. They were reading that email and their brains were rejecting the information. Tessa? The failure? The burden? Owning the company that held their credit rating in its hands? It must have seemed like a mistake to them, a typo, a prank. They were calling to tell me to stop playing games. They were calling to demand I fix the paperwork error so they could get their money. They still thought they were the ones in charge. I reached out and turned the phone over, silencing the display. I would not talk to them, not yet, not while they were manic. I needed them to sit with the silence. I needed them to call the bank and have Liam Porter confirm the truth. I needed them to pull the corporate filings and see my name stamped in black ink on documents from 5 years ago. I needed them to sweat. I stood up and walked over to the whiteboard. The diagram of the empire looked different now. It didn't look like a nervous system anymore. It looked like a patient on an operating table. I picked up a red marker. My family had spent the morning discussing how to cut costs. They had voted to cut the one cost that was actually an investment. I wrote a single sentence across the top of the whiteboard, right above the intricate map of their financial dependency. Today, the Calder family unplugged their own life support. I capped the marker and looked at the map. The question is, I thought, staring at the flashing red node of the blocked hotel deal, under what conditions will I agree to plug it back in? The digital clock on my microwave flashed 2:45 in the afternoon. In my apartment, the only sound was the hiss of the espresso machine and the soft hum of the refrigerator. It was a sanctuary of quiet, controlled power. Across the city, in the glass tower that bore my family's name, I knew the silence had been shattered. I could picture the scene in the executive boardroom as clearly as if I were standing there. I knew the way the afternoon light hit the long mahogany table. I knew the specific vibration of the phones when they started ringing in unison, and I knew, with absolute certainty, the temperature in that room was rising by the second. My computer screen acted as a window into their chaos. The first domino fell at 2:47. A notification popped up from the North Stone Harbor Bank portal. Status change. Credit facility 8904. Suspended pending guarantor review. I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot, bitter, and perfect. In my mind's eye, I saw the email land in Landon's inbox. My father does not check his own email often, but for a deal this size, he would have his iPad open. He would see the subject line. He would frown, that deep crease appearing between his eyebrows, thinking it was a glitch. He would tap the screen, expecting an apology from the bank. Instead, he would find a formal notice that the $250 million he needed to buy his hotel was being held hostage by the very person he had exiled 2 hours ago. Then the second wave hit. My internal dashboard for Blue K Stratagem Group lit up. Outgoing communication. Urgent review request sent to CFO. Calder and Rowe. And the third, Elmsway Arcadia Partners. Risk alert, issued to procurement division. At the tower, Elliot would be the first to crack. I knew my brother. He was a man who lived in spreadsheets, and his spreadsheets had just turned red. He would be frantically clicking through the digital files, trying to find the source of the blockage. I imagined him pulling up the guarantor documents for the North Stone loan. He would be looking for a signature from a CEO, a managing partner, some stranger in a suit. He would scroll to the bottom of the PDF, and there it was. I closed my eyes and let myself enjoy the moment. I could see Elliot's face draining of color. I could see him leaning in, squinting at the screen, his brain refusing to process the familiar loops and sharp angles of the signature. Tessa Calder. Not Marisol Ridge, not an anonymous fund manager, just me. the sister he had mocked for her lack of ambition. Back in my apartment, I set my coffee cup down and picked up my phone. It was vibrating so hard it was slowly moving across the desk. Grant Calder. Grant Calder. Grant Calder. He was calling to scream. He was calling to bully. He was calling to tell me that I had no right, that I was confused, that I was breaking the law. I let it ring. I imagined the shouting match that was erupting in the C-suite. Grant would be turning on Elliot. His face flushed. "How did you miss this?" he would yell. "You are the CFO. How do you not know who guarantees $250 million of our debt?" And Elliot, sweating through his expensive shirt, would be stammering, shifting the blame. "Legal cleared it. The compliance team said it was a verified entity. Nobody checks the beneficial ownership of a holding company with an A+ credit rating." Then Nolan would jump in. Nolan, whose construction sites were running on steel and glass financed by my vendor company. "I have crews standing around in Midtown," he would shout. "If Elmsway puts a hold on materials, we are in breach of contract by Friday. Fix this, Elliot." It was a symphony of panic, and I was the conductor. My phone stopped ringing for 3 seconds, then started again. This time, the name on the screen was Landon Calder. I stared at it. My father, the man who had looked me in the eye and told me I needed to learn the value of $1. I did not answer. Instead, I opened my messaging app. I typed out a response, keeping my thumb steady. "Currently conducting a risk assessment of all outstanding liabilities associated with Marisail Ridge Holdings. I am unable to discuss business matters until my legal counsel has completed their review. Will update via formal channels." I hit send. I was not his daughter right now. I was a counterparty. And in the world of high finance, you do not scream at a counterparty who holds your leash. You wait for them to tell you if you are allowed to walk. I turned back to my desk and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Sabrina Cole." A sharp voice answered on the first ring. Sabrina was my personal attorney, a shark I had hired 3 years ago when I realized my family might one day try to dismantle me. She was expensive, ruthless, and loyal only to the check signer. "It is done," I said. "They voted." "Those idiots," Sabrina said, her voice dropping an octave. "Did they sign the removal order?" "Effective 5 o'clock today," I said. "I need you to draft the separation agreement. I want a complete firewall between my personal assets and the Calder Family Trust, and I need a new term sheet for the Marisail guarantees. We are moving from a family support model to a distressed asset model." "Distressed asset," Sabrina repeated, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "You are going to squeeze them on the rates?" "I am going to squeeze them on control," I said. "Draft it. I want it ready for Monday morning." I hung up and dialed again. This time, the contact was Ruth Delgado. Ruth was a legend in the city. She sat on the board of 3 major corporations, including one of the Calder subsidiaries. She had mentored me secretly for years, ever since she saw me reading a book on forensic accounting in the corner of a boring charity gala. "Tessa," Ruth's voice was warm but alert. "I hear thunder." "The storm just broke," I said. "They voted me out. Ruth, they tried to cut my funding." "And I assume they just realized that they cut their own throat instead?" "They are realizing it right now," I said. "I blocked the hotel deal. I put the vendors on notice. Ruth, I need you to handle the board." "Consider it done," Ruth said. "The independent directors have been uneasy about Landon's expansion plans for months. If word gets out that the financing has collapsed because of internal family negligence, well, let us just say Landon's chair is going to get very hot, very fast." "Thank you, Ruth." "Give them hell, honey," she said. "They earned it." I leaned back in my chair. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. While the executives were screaming at each other on the 42nd floor, something else was happening in the lower levels of the tower. I had not planned for it, but I should have expected it. Information is like water. It always finds a crack. A text message popped up on my personal phone. It was from Sarah, a junior analyst in the marketing department. We had grabbed lunch together a few times when I was briefly trying to work at the company. She was smart, observant, and invisible to men like my brothers. Sarah, holy crap, is it true? Tessa, is what true? Sarah, the minutes from the trust meeting leaked. Someone in legal left a draft on the shared server for 10 minutes. Nolan called you a burden? I felt a spike of anger, not for me, but for the sheer incompetence of my family. They couldn't even keep their cruelty confidential. Sarah, people are talking. Tessa, and Jared in accounting is freaking out. He is telling anyone who will listen that Marisale Ridge is you. He says you are the one signing the checks for the new project. Is that true? Are you the money? I looked at the message. The rumor mill was churning. The narrative was shifting. For years, I had been the poor little rich girl, the one who couldn't hold down a job. Now, in the break rooms and the elevators, the staff were connecting the dots. The burden was the guarantor. The failure was the financier. By 4 o'clock, the atmosphere in the tower would be toxic. The employees, the ones who actually did the work, would realize that the leadership was not only cruel to their own blood, but also criminally negligent. They had fired their safety net. Confidence is a fragile thing. Once it cracks, you cannot glue it back together. External partners were starting to sniff the blood in the water. My email pinged with a notification from a specialized news outlet. Inquiry regarding stalled financing for Calder Coastal Project. They were losing control of the story. At 4:15, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Naomi, my cousin who had voted against me out of fear. Naomi, Uncle Landon just called everyone into his office. He looks 10 years older. He told Grant to shut up. I have never seen him like this. I stared at the screen, visualizing the scene. The sun would be dipping lower now, casting long shadows across my father's massive office. The bravado of the morning meeting would be gone. The slide projector was off. The charts of performance metrics were meaningless. I could see Landon standing by the window, looking out at the city he thought he owned, realizing that the reflection staring back at him was a man who had been outplayed by his own daughter. He would turn to his sons, Grant, the arrogant heir, Elliot, the careless CFO, Nolan, the bully. He would look at them and realize that none of them had the liquidity, the foresight, or the leverage to fix what they had just broken. He would have to say the words that would taste like ash in his mouth. I imagined his voice, gravelly and defeated. We need Tessa. And then, the second realization, the one that would hurt even more. And we have no idea how much we need her. I checked the time, 4:20. I had 40 minutes left before my access to the trust was officially revoked. 40 minutes until I was free. I stood up and walked to the kitchen to pour another cup of coffee. I moved slowly, deliberately. I was not in a rush. I was not the one whose empire was burning. Let them sit in the smoke a little longer. It would help them read the fine print when I finally sent over the new contract. The phone on my desk rang at 4:48 in the afternoon. It was 12 minutes before the deadline my father had set to erase me from the family trust. I looked at the caller ID. It was Landon. I let it ring 3 times, enough to make him wonder if I was going to answer, but not enough to send him to voicemail. I needed him to hear my voice. I needed him to hear that it was not shaking. This is Tessa, I said. Tessa. My father's voice came through the speaker. It was different. The booming baritone that usually commanded boardrooms was gone, replaced by a tone I recognized from my childhood. The soft, wheedling voice he used when he wanted my mother to forgive him for missing an anniversary. Tessa, honey, we need to talk. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated. That is an interesting word for a vote taken by 7 people and recorded in the official minutes. Emotions were running high, he said quickly. We were looking at incomplete data. We rushed. I want to sit down with you. Tonight. Just family. Come to the house. Your mother is making that roast you like. I almost laughed. The roast. As if a piece of meat could fix a $250 million financing crisis. No, I said. I will not come to the house. And I will not come to the tower. If you want to speak to me, You can meet me at the Meridian Hotel in the Financial District, Boardroom B. I have it booked for 6 o'clock. The Meridian? He hesitated. Why there? Because Marisail Ridge Holdings is a preferred corporate client there, I said, letting the name of my company hang in the air like smoke. They give me the room for free. I will see you at 6. Landon, bring the boys. I hung up before he could argue. I arrived at the Meridian at 5:45. The room was perfect. Neutral, sterile, and expensive. It was not home. It was not their office. It was Switzerland. I laid the documents out on the polished oak table. I did not arrange them haphazardly. I placed them with surgical precision. The Northstone guarantee on the left. The Blue Key bond certificates in the center. The Elmsway vendor contracts on the right. And right in front of the empty chair at the head of the table, the chair I intended for my father, I placed the summary sheet. At 6 o'clock sharp, the door opened. Landon walked in first. He had changed out of his suit into a cashmere sweater and slacks, a visual attempt to signal family time, but his eyes were darting around the room, assessing the threat level. Grant and Nolan followed him, still in their work suits, looking like schoolboys who had been called to the principal's office. Elliot was missing, presumably still chained to his desk trying to stop the bleeding. "Tessa," my father said, opening his arms as if to hug me. I stood behind the chair at the opposite end of the table. I did not move forward. I did not smile. "Sit down," I said. My father froze. His arms dropped. He looked at the chair I had indicated, then back at me. For the first time in his life, he was not the one setting the agenda. He pulled out the chair and sat. Grant and Nolan took the seats beside him, silent and sullen. "Look," my father started, leaning forward, clasping his hands. "I know you are hurt, and you have every right to be. The meeting this morning, it was harsh, I admit that, but you have to understand. I was trying to motivate you. I looked at you and I saw so much potential going to waste. I thought if I pushed you out of the nest, you would fly." "You did not want me to fly, Dad," I said quietly. "You wanted to save $600,000 a year because your liquidity was drying up." "It is not about the money," he insisted, his voice taking on a pleading edge. "It is about legacy. I wanted you to build something, to be something." "I am something," I said. I pointed to the document in front of him. "Turn it over." Landon looked at the paper. He reached out with a hand that had a slight tremor in it, something I had never seen before, and flipped the page. It was the Northstone Harbor Bank Guarantor Agreement, the one that was currently holding up his hotel deal. He stared at the signature at the bottom. The ink was black and sharp. Tessa Evelyn Calder, managing member. "You," he whispered, "you are Marisail?" "And Blue Key," I added, "and Elmsway, and the majority shareholder of the logistics firm that moves your steel." Grant made a noise in his throat, a choked sound of disbelief. He grabbed the paper from our father and stared at it. "This is impossible," Grant spat. "Where did you get the capital? You have been broke for a decade. You drive a Honda." "I have been investing," I said. "While you were buying boats, I was buying yield. While you were leveraging the company to buy prestige, I was buying the debt you were issuing." "But why?" my father asked. He looked genuinely bewildered. "Why hide it? Why let us treat you like that?" "Because I wanted to be sure," I said. "I wanted to see if you valued me for me, or if you only valued the checkbook. I got my answer this morning, loud and clear." "Tessa, please," my father said. He stood up, trying to regain his height, trying to loom over the table. "We are family. Toughening you up was love. It was tough love. You cannot hold a business grudge over a family matter." I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, bitter and sharp. "Sit down. Landon," I said. I did not raise my voice, but the command was absolute. He sat. "Let us be very clear about what happened today," I said, leaning my hands on the table. "This morning, in your tower, you looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't successful enough to sit at the table. You told me I brought nothing of value. You told me I was a burden." I picked up the stack of bond certificates, $60 million of his debt that I could call in tomorrow, and drop them back onto the wood. The slap of the paper echoed in the silent room. "Well, look around you, Dad," I said. "I am not just sitting at the table. I am the table." The silence that followed was total. I saw the realization hit him like a physical blow. He looked at the papers, then at the walls of the room, then at me. He realized that the foundation of his entire world, the loans, the supplies, the logistics, was me. He had been standing on my shoulders while kicking me in the face. "We can fix this," Grant interrupted. He was in deal mode now, desperate and sweating. "Okay, you have leverage. Fine, we respect that. We will reinstate the trust fund. We will double the distribution, $1.2 million a year, and a title, Executive Vice President of Strategy. You come in. You get the corner office next to Dad. We announce it on Monday." I looked at my brother. He really thought that was what I wanted. He thought I was looking for a gold star and a bigger allowance. "I do not want your money, Grant," I said. "I have my own, clearly more than you do, since I am the one lending it to you." "Then what do you want?" Nolan burst out. He had been quiet until now, staring at the vendor contracts. He looked up at me, his face twisted not with shame, but with frustration. "Why didn't you tell us? Do you know what we could have done if we knew the capital was in the family? We could have doubled the acquisition speed. We could have bought the marina project last year. We wasted so much time negotiating with strangers when we could have just used you." I stared at Nolan. There it was, the naked, ugly truth. He wasn't sorry they had hurt me. He was sorry they hadn't exploited me sooner. He was annoyed that my silence had caused an inefficiency in their growth model. "That," I said, pointing a finger at Nolan, "is exactly why I never told you." I gathered my purse. The meeting was over. There was nothing left to say. "Tessa, wait," my father said. He sounded old. "You cannot walk out. The bank needs the authorization by tomorrow morning. If the hotel deal falls through, we lose the deposit. $10 million. Gone." "That sounds like a liquidity problem," I said. "I suggest you check your performance metrics." "Tessa, I am your father," he pleaded. "Do not use business to destroy your family." I stopped at the door. I turned back to look at them. The three men who had defined my worth for 34 years were now small, frightened figures under the fluorescent lights of a rented room. "You are confused. Landon," I said, "you told me this morning that the vote was strictly business. You said emotion had no place in asset management. Now you want me to use sentiment to fix a balance sheet error?" I shook my head. "No, we are going to play by your rules. You wanted to separate business and family? We are separated." I opened the door. "I will see you on Monday morning at your office," I said. "Have your lawyers present. We are going to renegotiate the terms of every single loan, guarantee, and vendor contract. Marisail Ridge holds with Calder and Rowe. We are going to talk about interest rates, collateral, and control." "Tessa," my father whispered, "please." "And Dad," I added, my hand on the brass handle, "do not call me honey in that meeting. When you walk into that room on Monday, you are not speaking to your daughter. You are speaking to your biggest creditor. I suggest you prepare accordingly because my terms will not be easy." I walked out and let the heavy door click shut behind me. I did not look back, but I knew what I left behind. I left a father staring at a piece of paper that proved his daughter owned him. I left two brothers realizing their inheritance was mortgaged to the sister they had called a failure. I walked down the hallway of the hotel, the carpet silencing my footsteps. I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret was out. The burden was gone. Now the negotiation began. I did not turn on the monitors when I got back to the apartment. For the first time in 7 years, I did not want to look at the glow of spreadsheets or the spiderweb of leverage I had built. I sat in the dark of my second bedroom, the leather chair cool against my back, and listened to the city hum outside the window. The adrenaline from the confrontation at the hotel was fading, leaving behind a hollow ache in my chest. I had done it. I had walked into a room with the men who had terrified and belittled me for my entire adult life, and I had made them small. I had watched my father's face crumble from arrogance into fear. I had watched Grant and Nolan realize that the sister they mocked was the only reason they were not bankrupt. It should have felt like victory. It should have felt like the end of a movie where the hero walks away in slow motion while the villain's lair explodes. But it didn't. It just felt sad. I spun the chair slowly, staring at the blank whiteboard where I had written that final sentence earlier. Today, the Calder family unplugged their own life support. I asked myself the question that Sabrina, my lawyer, would ask me in 10 minutes. What do you want? Tessa? Really? Do I want to burn it down? Do I want to watch the Calder and Rowe Tower get sold off for parts? Do I want to see my father humiliated on the front page of the Wall Street Journal? Part of me did. The part of me that remembered the Christmas dinner 3 years ago. I closed my eyes and the memory washed over me, sharp as a knife. We were at my parents' estate. The table was set with the good china. Grant was holding court, telling a story about how he had bullied a zoning commissioner into approving 5 extra floors on the Midtown project. It is all about leverage, Grant had boomed, waving his fork. You have to know what they are afraid of losing. Everyone laughed. My father beamed at him with pride. And then, he had turned to me. I was sitting at the far end of the table, squeezed in next to a second cousin. Tessa, my father had said, not breaking his gaze from Grant. We are out of the Cabernet. Go down to the cellar and bring up 2 more bottles, and check on the coats in the foyer. I think Aunt Margaret was looking for her scarf. I was 31 years old. I had a master's degree, and I was being sent to fetch wine like a waitress because I wasn't important enough to be part of the conversation about leverage. I remembered walking down to the cellar, my hands shaking. I remembered picking out the bottles, and I remembered the notification that had popped up on my phone right as I grabbed the wine. It was a confirmation from Elmsway Arcadia Partners. I had just approved the bridge financing for the very zoning permits Grant was bragging about. I had paid for the permits. I had paid for the wine. And yet, I was the servant. I opened my eyes. The anger was still there, but it was cold now. It was useful. I didn't want to destroy the company. There were innocent people working there, people like Sarah in marketing, people like the site foreman. Destroying the company to hurt my father would make me just like him. It would mean using people as collateral damage for my own ego. But I would never, ever go back to fetching the wine. My phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. I picked it up, expecting another pleading text from my father. It was from Naomi. Naomi. Tessa, I am so sorry. I can't stop crying. I wanted to vote no. I swear I did. But Grant pulled me aside before the meeting. He told me that if I didn't show a united front, the voting committee would review my position at the charitable foundation next. He said I would lose my funding. He said I would be next on the chopping block. I was scared. I am a coward. Please forgive me. I stared at the screen. So that was how they did it. Coercion, threats. My father and brothers didn't lead this family. They held it hostage. They used money as a weapon to keep everyone in line. If you stepped out of formation, they cut off your oxygen. They had tried to do it to me this morning. They just hadn't realized I brought my own oxygen tank. I could have ignored Naomi. She had raised her hand. She had voted to cut me off. But I knew what it felt like to be small in that room. I knew what it felt like to have Landon Calder stare at you with eyes that measured your worth in dollars. I typed a reply. Tessa, I do not blame you. Naomi, I know how they work, but listen to me carefully. I am not going to let them use your fear to control me anymore, and I am not going to let them use it to control you, either. Just sit tight. Things are going to change. I sent it. It was a small act of grace, but it felt important. I was not going to become a tyrant to fight a tyrant. I sat up straight and turned on the main monitor. It was time to work. I opened the video conferencing app and dialed Sabrina. Her face appeared instantly on the screen. She was in her home office, a glass of red wine in her hand, and a predatory grin on her face. I heard from the grapevine that Landon called the bank in a panic at 5:15, Sabrina said. Apparently, he was screaming about a misunderstanding, Tell me everything.
I met them, I said. I showed them the cards. And? And they are terrified, I said. They realize they fired their bank. Sabrina took a sip of wine. Beautiful. So, what is the play for Monday? Do we call the loans? Do we foreclose on the hotel? I have the paperwork ready to seize the collateral. We can take the keys to the coastal project by Wednesday.
No, I said. We do not foreclose. Sabrina raised an eyebrow. Tessa, do not tell me you are going to go soft. They humiliated you. They tried to ruin you.
I am not going soft, I said. I am going strategic. If I foreclose, the company collapses. The stock goes to zero. My assets, the debt I hold, become worthless. I lose money. I am not going to lose money just to teach them a lesson.
Okay, Sabrina said. Putting the glass down, she picked up a pen. So what is the objective? Separation, I said. Total, legal, irrevocable separation of business and family. I want a church and state division between the Calder Family Trust and Calder and Rowe Holdings.
Explain, she said, writing.
For 30 years, my father has run that public company like a private piggy bank, I said. He uses family loyalty to bypass corporate governance. He uses trust fund threats to silence board members. That ends Monday.
You want reinstatement to the trust? Sabrina asked.
We can demand they reverse the vote. We can force them to give you your allowance back plus damages.
No, I said. The word came out harder than I intended. I do not want back in the trust.
Sabrina paused. You don't?
No. If I go back into the trust, I am a beneficiary. I am a child asking for an allowance. I am subject to their rules, their performance metrics, their judgment. I don't want their charity.
Sabrina, I want their interest payments. I stood up and began pacing the room, the phone in my hand so Sabrina could see me. Here is the term sheet, I said. Draft this up. First, I am formally renouncing my position as a beneficiary of the Calder Family Trust. I am out, permanently. I want it in writing that I have no claim to their family money, and they have no claim to mine.
Bold, Sabrina muttered. Okay, next. Second, I continued, all capital currently provided by Marisail Ridge, Blue Key, and Elmsway will be consolidated under a new master financing agreement. We are treating this as a commercial restructuring. I want market rate interest on everything. No more family discounts. If the market rate is 8%, they pay me 8%. If they are high risk, and they are, they pay 12%.
They will scream, Sabrina said. That will cost them millions in operational expenses. They can afford it if they stop buying yachts, I said. Third, governance. I want a seat on the board of directors, not an observer seat, a voting seat. And I want the voting power attached to my debt instruments converted into equity rights.
You want control, Sabrina said.
I want oversight, I corrected. I want to be the one person in that room who can say no to Landon without being written out of the will. I want a veto power on any new debt issuance over $10 million. If Grant wants to build a monument to his ego, he has to ask me if he can afford the bricks.
I like it, Sabrina said, typing furiously. What about the burden narrative? How do we handle the optics?
We kill it with transparency, I said. I want a clause that mandates an independent audit of all related party transactions. Every time the company borrows money from a family member, me or anyone else, it has to be disclosed to the entire board. No more secret deals, no more shadows.
Tessa, Sabrina said, looking at me through the screen, you are not just asking for a seat at the table, you are asking to redesign the furniture.
They said I wasn't successful enough, I said. I am just showing them what success looks like. It looks like accountability. I will have the draft ready by Sunday noon. Sabrina said, Get some sleep. Monday is going to be a bloodbath. No, I said. Monday is just business. I ended the call. The apartment was quiet again. I walked out of the office and into the living room. I opened the sliding glass door and stepped out onto the small balcony. The air was crisp, smelling of autumn and exhaust fumes. Below me, the city was a grid of golden lights. Somewhere in that grid was the Calder Tower, dark and looming. Somewhere else was my parents' penthouse, probably full of shouting and recriminations right now. I took a deep breath. For years, I had been afraid of this moment. I had been afraid of being cut off. I had been afraid of being an orphan. I had let them treat me like dirt because I thought the connection to the family was the only thing keeping me grounded. But standing there, gripping the cold metal railing, I realized something strange. I didn't feel lonely. I felt light. The tether had been cut, but I wasn't falling. I was flying. My father had spent my whole life trying to mold me into a Calder, someone ruthless, loud, and flashy. He had failed. I wasn't a Calder in his image. I was something else entirely. I was the person who fixed the things he broke. I looked at the skyline. "You wanted me out," I whispered to the wind. "Okay, I am out." But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was taking my dignity. I was taking my self-respect. And I was taking the checkbook. If they wanted to separate me from the family on paper, fine, I would separate them from my money on paper. From Monday onward, when they looked at me across the boardroom table, they wouldn't see a daughter, a sister, or a burden. They would see a lender. And everyone knows that the lender is the one who truly owns the house. I turned around and walked back inside. Sliding the door shut, I locked it. I was ready for Monday. I was ready to turn the burden into the boss. Sunday morning broke over the city with the deceptive calm of a blue sky. But inside the financial district, the storm was already making landfall. I woke up at 6:30, not to an alarm, but to the persistent pinging of my news alerts. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my eyes adjusting to the bright screen. The headline from the City Business Journal was the first thing I saw. Calder and Rowe delays coastal hotel acquisition amidst credit rumors. I sat up, the sheets falling away. I tapped the article. The text was vague, citing sources close to the deal who claimed there were technical difficulties with the primary credit facility. In Wall Street language, technical difficulties is a polite euphemism for the money has vanished. The market does not like euphemisms. The market likes certainty. And when the market smells uncertainty, it begins to sell. I went to the kitchen and turned on the small television I kept on the counter, tuning it to the financial news network. The ticker at the bottom of the screen showed Calder and Rowe's bond prices. They were down 2 points in pre-market trading. It wasn't a crash yet, but it was a tremor. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a news alert. It was a direct message on an encrypted app from Greg, a journalist I had cultivated over years of tipping him off to small, unrelated real estate trends. Greg: "Morning, Tessa. I am hearing weird chatter about the hotel deal. Rumor is an anonymous investor pulled the plug at the 11th hour. Is Marisail Ridge involved? I see your entity on some old filings. Off the record." I stared at the screen. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. This was the tipping point. Until this moment, this had been a private war fought in boardrooms and email chains. Now, it was bleeding out into the street. If I confirmed it, I could tank the company stock before breakfast. If I denied it, I would be lying. I typed back carefully. "Tessa, you know I do not discuss client positions. Greg, but I would suggest you look into the covenant requirements for the guarantor. It might be an interesting read." I didn't light the match, but I certainly handed him the box. Across town, inside the glass tower, I knew the atmosphere would be approaching hysteria. I could imagine the scene in the crisis management room on the 35th floor. The PR team would be huddled around a conference table covered in empty coffee cups, trying to draft a press release that sounded confident without actually saying anything. The general counsel would be yelling at the compliance officers, asking how they could have let a conflict of interest of this magnitude go unnoticed for 7 years. And Landon? My father would be pacing. He would be realizing that he couldn't just tell the truth. He couldn't go out and say, "We fired the primary lender because she was my daughter and we didn't think she was cool enough." That wasn't just embarrassing. It was a breach of fiduciary duty. It was the kind of negligence that got CEOs sued by their own shareholders. At 9:15, the first heavy blow landed. My internal system for Marisail Ridge flagged an incoming high-priority email. It wasn't from the family. It was from the state teachers' pension fund. They were one of the largest institutional investors in Calder and Rowe, holding about 8% of the company's stock. They were conservative, risk-averse, and very powerful. 2. Investor Relations. Calder and Rowe Holdings. Marisail Ridge Holdings via registered agent. Subject: urgent clarification regarding related party transactions. Dear Mr. Calder, it has come to our attention through internal risk audits that a significant portion of the company's debt and vendor financing is held or guaranteed by entities under the control of a direct family member. Ms. Tessa Calder, please provide immediate clarification on the disclosure of these relationships and the governance structures in place to manage this conflict of interest. Failure to provide satisfactory documentation within 48 hours will trigger a review of our position. I read the email twice. A smile, devoid of any warmth, touched my lips. My father thought he was fighting a skirmish with a disgruntled daughter. He just realized he was fighting a war with his own cap table. The pension fund didn't care about family dynamics. They cared about governance. They cared that the CEO was making emotional decisions with their money. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to sit there and let the gravity of his own mistakes crush him. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Ruth Delgado.
Tessa, she said, her voice crisp and low. I am standing in the hallway outside the boardroom. It is a zoo in there.
I saw the bond prices, I said, pouring myself a glass of water. And I saw the letter from the teacher's pension.
You saw it?
Ruth sounded surprised. Landon is trying to keep that buried. He told the board it was just a standard inquiry.
I was copied, Ruth, I reminded her. Marisail is the counterparty. I see everything they see.
Right, Ruth said. Well, listen to me. The independent directors are huddling. We are not comfortable. If the company is this dependent on your personal capital, and Landon just tried to sever ties with you without a backup plan, that is gross mismanagement. We have a fiduciary duty to step in.
What are you proposing? I asked.
We want to meet with you, Ruth said. Not Landon, you. We need to know if you are actually going to pull the plug. Because if you are, we need to suspend trading and declare a crisis. But if you are willing to negotiate, we need to know your terms. We are the adults in the room. Tessa, help us save the furniture. This was the shift. This was the moment I stopped being a family problem and became a corporate solution. I am not going to pull the plug. Ruth, I said calmly, I have no interest in bankrupting the company. My dispute is with the management style, not the assets. I am willing to refinance. I am willing to stabilize the hotel deal.
But, Ruth asked, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
But the era of the Landon dictatorship is over, I said. I want governance. I want oversight. And I want it in writing. I can work with that, Ruth said. I will rally the independents. We are going to force Landon to accept a special committee meeting tomorrow. Be ready. I hung up. The leverage was shifting again. It wasn't just financial anymore. It was political. I had the votes. At 11:30, I decided to tighten the screws just a little bit more. I opened the portal for Elmsway Arcadia Partners, my vendor financing firm. I drafted a formal notice to the procurement department of Calder and Rowe. Notice of term adjustment due to credit risk event. Effective immediately. Elmsway Arcadia Partners is moving all active accounts for Calder and Rowe Holdings from Net 30 to cash on delivery. Furthermore, we require the appointment of an independent financial monitor to approve all new purchase orders exceeding $50,000. I hit send. 10 minutes later, Nolan called. I ignored it. Then Grant called. I ignored it. Finally, at noon, Elliot called. Elliot was the CFO. He was the one who was supposed to understand the numbers. He was the one who had presented the slide showing I was a burden. I stared at the phone. I decided to answer.
Hello, Elliot, I said. Are you insane? Elliot didn't even say hello. His voice was high and tight, bordering on hysterical. Cash on delivery? Tessa, do you have any idea what that does to our liquidity? We have $4 million in steel arriving on Tuesday. We cannot pay cash for that. We rely on the float.
Then maybe you shouldn't have voted to fire your bank, I said, my voice cool and steady. Risk profiles change. Elliot, when a company loses its primary guarantor and faces a pension fund inquiry, its credit rating drops. Elmsway is just reacting to the market. You are Elmsway, Elliot shouted. It is you. You are doing this.
I am the owner of Elmsway, I corrected him. And as the owner, I have a responsibility to protect my company from high-risk clients. Right now, Calder & Rowe is a high-risk client.
We are your family, Elliot screamed. The desperation in his voice was ugly. You are destroying the legacy. Grandfather built this. Dad built this. And you are going to burn it all down because your feelings got hurt?
I felt a cold flash of anger, sharp and precise.
The legacy? I asked. Which legacy is that, Elliot? The one where you falsify the minutes to hide conflict of interest? The one where you use trust fund threats to bully your cousins? Or the legacy where you stand in a room full of strangers and mock the sister who has been secretly paying your salary for 7 years?
We didn't know, Elliot protested. If you had just told us— If I had told you, I cut him off, you would have taken the credit. You would have taken the money and patted me on the head and told me I was a good girl for helping the men do the real work. You never respected me. Elliot, you just liked the safety net. Well, the net is gone. Learn to fly. Tessa, please. Elliot's voice broke. He was crying. Dad is losing it. He is in his office staring at the wall. If the stock tanks tomorrow, we lose everything. My options. My house.
Then tell him to accept the meeting, I said. Monday morning, 9 a.m., and tell him that if he wants to save his stock, he better bring a pen.
I hung up. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally saying the words I had swallowed for a decade.
The afternoon passed in a blur of incoming emails. The legal department of Calder & Rowe sent a formal letter acknowledging my representation of Marisale Ridge. It was stiff, formal, and terrified. They addressed me as Ms. Calder, not Tessa. At 4 o'clock, a courier arrived at my apartment. He handed me a thick envelope with the Calder & Rowe seal on it. Inside was a formal invitation to an extraordinary meeting of the board of directors and key stakeholders, scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. The agenda had one item: restructuring of debt obligations and governance review. Attached to the invitation was a guest list. Landon Calder, Chairman, Grant Calder, Executive VP, Elliot Calder, CFO, Ruth Delgado, Lead Independent Director, Representative for Teachers Pension Fund. And at the bottom, printed in bold, Tessa Calder, Representative for Marisale Ridge Holdings, Elmsway Arcadia Partners, and Blue Case Stratagem Group. I ran my finger over the text. There it was. No daughter, no trust beneficiary, no burden. I was coming to the table as a conglomerate. I walked to my closet to choose my outfit for the next day. I pushed past the soft florals and the sensible cardigans I used to wear to family dinners, the clothes of a woman trying to look harmless. I reached for the back of the closet. I pulled out a suit I had bought in Milan 3 years ago with the dividends from a tech buyout. It was charcoal gray, sharp enough to cut glass, and cost more than my brother's cars. I held it up against myself in the mirror. Tomorrow, I wouldn't walk into that boardroom seeking approval. I wouldn't be looking for a hug from my mother or a nod from my father. Tomorrow, I was walking in to accept their surrender. The pressure from the outside world had done its job. The glass tower was cracking, and I was the only one holding the glue. The Sunday night sky was pitch black against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment, but inside, the lights were blazing. My living room, usually a sanctuary of silence, had been transformed into a war room. I had not invited my family. There were no Calders here tonight. Instead,
I had gathered the executioners. Sitting on my IKEA sofa was Ruth Delgado, balancing a cup of herbal tea on her knee. Next to her was Liam Porter from Northstone Harbor Bank, looking uncomfortable without a tie. Sabrina Cole, my attorney, had claimed the dining table, her laptop open, fingers flying across the keys. Leaning against the wall was Marcus Thorne, an independent governance expert I had flown in from Chicago on 3 hours' notice. And sitting in the armchair was the CEO of the largest steel supplier in the state, a man whose invoices Elmsway Arcadia Partners had been financing for 5 years. The air in the room was thick with the smell of coffee and high-stakes calculation. "We have 2 scenarios," I said. Standing in front of my portable whiteboard, I uncapped a black marker. Scenario A is the nuclear option. I wrote the word default on the board. "I withdraw the Marisale guarantee at 9 a.m. tomorrow," I said, my voice clinical. "Liam, walk us through the cascade." Liam cleared his throat. He looked tired. "If the guarantee is pulled, Northstone declares a technical default on the coastal facility immediately. The cross-default clauses trigger on the Midtown Tower loans. We freeze all operating accounts by noon. Payroll bounces on Friday." "And the vendors?" I looked at the steel CEO. "We stop the trucks," he said simply. "We file liens on the construction sites to recover materials. The unions walk off the job by Wednesday." "Total collapse," Marcus Thorne added, rubbing his chin. "Bankruptcy protection within 30 days. The stock goes to pennies. The assets get auctioned off to private equity vultures. And the 900 employees of Calder and Rowe are on the street." I looked around the room. "That is scenario A. It satisfies my anger. It destroys the people who humiliated me. But it also destroys 1,000 innocent livelihoods." I wiped the board clean. The screech of the eraser was the only sound in the room. "I am not interested in being the villain," I said. "I am interested in being the architect. So let us look at scenario B." I wrote restructure on the board. "In this scenario," I said, "Marisale Ridge maintains the credit support. We keep the life support machine plugged in. But in exchange, the patient undergoes radical surgery." "The patient isn't going to like surgery," Ruth said dryly. "Landon has run that company as a monarchy since 1985. "The monarchy ends tomorrow," I said. "Sabrina, start a new draft. Let us list the terms of surrender." Sabrina's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Ready." "Item 1, I said, pacing the length of the rug. "Leadership. Landon Calder is removed as CEO effective immediately. We will allow a 6-month transition period where he holds the title of honorary chairman, but he retains no executive authority, no hiring, no firing, and absolutely no check-signing privileges." "He will scream," Liam noted. "His identity is that chair." "He can keep the chair," I said. "He just can't drive the bus. We appoint an interim CEO, someone from the outside, vetted by Marcus, while we conduct a global search." "Done," Sabrina said. "Next." Item 2, the trust. I stopped pacing. This was the most personal cut. "I am formally renouncing my status as a beneficiary of the Calder Family Trust," I said. "I want it in the agreement. I am walking away from the stipend, the inheritance, and the safety net they think holds me captive." Ruth frowned. "You are giving up your birthright, Tessa." "I am trading it," I corrected her. "In exchange for renouncing the trust, I want every dollar of debt I hold. The bonds, the vendor financing, the bridge loans, recognized as senior secured capital, and I want the voting rights attached to that capital converted into board seats. I am not a child asking for an allowance anymore. I am a shareholder demanding a return." "Separation of church and state," Marcus nodded approvingly. "You are turning a family dispute into a cap table restructuring. It is clean." Item 3, I continued. "Risk management. We establish a new risk committee on the board. I want a seat on it, and I want veto power over any new debt issuance exceeding $5 million. "Grant is going to hate that," Sabrina chuckled. "He won't be able to buy a coffee machine without your approval." "Grant has bought enough toys," I said. If he wants to build a legacy, he can build it with a business plan that actually penciled out, not with my money. I turned to the steel supplier. Item 4, vendor relations. We include a no coercion clause. Calder and Rowe is famously abusive to its suppliers. Using the family name to demand discounts and delay payments, that stops. If a family member attempts to use personal leverage to renegotiate a commercial contract, it is grounds for immediate dismissal from the board. That is the Grant and Nolan clause, Ruth murmured. Exactly, I said. I am taking away their favorite weapon. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. I thought about the people who actually made the company work. The receptionists, the janitors, the junior analysts like Sarah who were texting me in panic. One more thing, I said, turning back to the room. Item 5, the vanity budget reallocation. The what? Liam asked. The company spends about $2 million a year on client relations, I said. That is code for the annual gala, the box seats at the stadium, and the private jet hours for networking trips to Cabo. We are capping that budget at $250,000. And the savings? Sabrina asked. The savings go into a new fund, I said. The Calder Employee Scholarship and Hardship Fund, managed by an independent third party. Any employee below the manager level can apply for tuition assistance or emergency grants. The room went silent. Ruth set her tea down. She looked at me with a softness I rarely saw in her. You are taking their party money and giving it to the mailroom? I am taking the money they used to show off, I said, and using it to build loyalty. If they want to be a family business, they need to start treating the employees like family. That is going to sting them more than losing the CEO title, Marcus said. You are attacking their lifestyle. I am correcting their priorities, I replied. For the next 3 hours, we hammered out the details. We argued over interest rates. We defined breach of contract. We built a cage made of legal clauses and financial covenants, designed to contain the ego of 3 grown men. By 11 o'clock, the document was done. Liam stood up and stretched. I can sell this to the bank's credit committee, he said. It is aggressive, but it stabilizes the risk. If Landon signs this, we release the funds for the hotel by noon. He will sign, I said. He has no choice. As the guests filed out, thanking me and shaking my hand like I was a visiting head of state, the apartment grew quiet again. Only Sabrina remained. She was printing the final document on my wireless printer. The rhythmic zip, zip, zip of the paper was hypnotic. Sabrina walked over to the printer and picked up the warm stack of paper. She stapled it with a satisfying thunk. You know, she said, handing it to me, we have covered every asset, every liability, and every governance protocol, but there is one thing missing. What is that? I asked, taking the document. It felt heavy in my hand. The feelings, Sabrina said gently. Tessa, these are your parents. These are your brothers. You are effectively firing your father and putting your siblings on an allowance. Are you ready for the Thanksgiving dinner conversation? Are you ready for the guilt trips? The how could you do this to us speeches? I looked down at the cover page. Marisale Ridge Holdings proposed restructuring terms for Calder and Rowe Holdings, confidential and binding. I ran my thumb over the bold text. I spent 7 years waiting for them to love me for who I was, I said softly. I waited for them to see past the bank account. I waited for them to realize that the burden was actually the backbone. I looked up at Sabrina. They made their choice on Friday morning. They chose the money. They chose the performance metrics. So, I am giving them exactly what they asked for. But do you forgive them? Sabrina asked. I thought about Landon's face in the hotel room. I thought about Grant's arrogance. I thought about the way my mother had looked at the flower arrangement instead of me. Forgiveness is an emotional concept. Sabrina, I said, my voice steady. This document is a commercial one. Emotions are not a line item I am willing to negotiate anymore, and they are certainly not something I'm willing to give them for free. Sabrina nodded slowly. She packed up her laptop. I will see you at the tower at 8:45. Wear the gray suit. Good night, Sabrina. When she left, I was alone. I took the document and placed it on the coffee table. I sat down on the sofa and closed my laptop. The screen went black, cutting off the glow of the digital empire I had built. Tomorrow morning, I would walk into the building where I had been dismissed as a failure. I would sit at the head of the table. I would slide this document across the mahogany, and I would watch as the Calder dynasty ended and something new began. It wasn't revenge. Revenge is hot and messy. This was justice, and justice is cold, precise, and signed in black ink. I turned off the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. Save for the city lights outside, I was ready. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt different this time. On Friday, I had been a passenger, a ghost in the machine of my father's empire. Today, the elevator felt like a capsule delivering a warhead. I stood in the center of the car, flanked by Ruth Delgado on my left and Liam Porter on my right. We did not speak. We did not need to. The silence was the silence of soldiers checking their weapons before the ramp drops. When the doors slid open, the reception area was unnaturally quiet. The receptionist, a woman named Brenda who had known me since I was in braces, looked up. Her eyes went wide when she saw the entourage. She did not say, "Hi, Tessa." She picked up her phone and whispered a warning to the back office. We walked past the glass walls of the conference room. It was packed. On Friday, there had been 7 people in the room. Today, there were 30. The mahogany table was crowded with the entire board of directors, the representatives from the State Teachers Pension Fund, the external legal counsel, and huddled together at the far end, my family. Landon sat at the head of the table, but he looked small in his chair. Grant and Elliot were on either side of him, whispering furiously to each other. Nolan was chewing on a pen, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. I did not walk to the empty chair at the foot of the table, the daughter's seat. I walked to the center. Ruth pulled out a chair for me, and I sat down, placing a thick leather binder on the wood. Liam sat to my right. Sabrina, who had arrived earlier, sat to my left. The room fell into a silence so absolute I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Landon cleared his throat. He tried to smile, but it looked like a rictus of pain. He adjusted his tie, trying to summon the CEO persona that had dominated this room for 3 decades. "Well," Landon said, his voice straining for a casual tone. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. It seems we have a full house. I know there have been some rumors and some anxiety over the weekend regarding our liquidity position, but I want to assure the board and our partners that this is simply a matter of miscommunication." He looked at me then. His eyes were pleading. "Tessa," he said, using the name like a lifeline, "I am glad you are here. We just need to clear up a few administrative misunderstandings regarding the guarantor paperwork so we can get back to business as usual, back to our original trajectory." I looked at him. I looked at Grant, who was glaring at me with a mixture of hatred and fear. I looked at the pension fund representative, who was taking notes. "The original trajectory," I said, my voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room, "is a path where this board calls its primary financier a burden. I do not want to go back to that trajectory." "Tessa, please," Grant hissed. "Do not air dirty laundry in front of the shareholders." I ignored him. I turned to the room. "For those who do not know me," I said, "my name is Tessa Calder, but I am not here today as a member of the Calder family. I am here as the managing member of Marisail Ridge Holdings, the majority owner of Elmsway Arcadia Partners, and the primary voting partner of Bluecay Stratagem Group." A murmur rippled through the room. The independent directors exchanged glances. They knew those company names. They saw them on every invoice, every loan document, every risk report. "For the past 7 years," I continued, "these entities have provided over 40% of the working capital and debt guarantees that keep Calder and Rowe operational. On Friday morning, the voting members of the Calder Family Trust decided to sever ties with me. They declared me a liability." I signaled to Liam. He connected his laptop to the projector. The screen behind Landon, the same screen that had shown my failure slide on Friday, now displayed a stark, terrifying line graph. It showed the company's cash flow, and then, at the date mark for today, the line dropped off a cliff. "This is not a threat," I said, pointing to the screen. "This is gravity. If I accept the family's decision to cut me off, I am legally obligated to protect my own investors. That means withdrawing the Marisale guarantee. That means Elmsway stops shipping steel. That means Blue Key calls in its bonds." I looked directly at the pension fund representative. "If I walk out of this room without a new agreement," I said, "Northstone Harbor Bank will declare a technical default by noon. The rating agencies will downgrade the corporate debt to junk status by 5 o'clock, and the liquidity crisis will force a cessation of operations at the Midtown and coastal sites by Wednesday." The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of money evaporating. Mr. Henderson, the representative from the pension fund, adjusted his glasses. He looked at the screen. Then he turned his gaze slowly, deliberately, toward my father. "Mr. Calder," Henderson said. His voice was dry and devoid of emotion. "You are the chairman and CEO. Are you telling this board that you were unaware that your own daughter was the beneficial owner of your primary credit support?" Landon opened his mouth. He looked at Grant. He looked at Elliot. There was no help coming. If he lied, he would be committing fraud. If he told the truth, he was admitting to gross incompetence. Landon started. He swallowed hard. "I was not aware of the specific ownership structure of those entities. No." "You did not know," Henderson repeated. He let the words hang there, condemning him. "You voted to remove a beneficiary from your trust without performing basic due diligence on her value to this corporation." "We thought she was just living off the stipend," Grant burst out. "She never told us. She deceived us." "She saved you," Ruth Delgado snapped from beside me. "She has been propping up your balance sheet for years while you took the credit, and instead of thanking her, you humiliated her." I reached out and placed my hand on the binder in front of me. "That is in the past," I said. "We are here to talk about the future." I slid the binder across the polished wood. It spun slowly and came to a stop in the center of the table, exactly halfway between me and my father. "On Friday," I said, "you told me I was not successful enough to be part of this family's legacy. You were right. I am not interested in the family legacy anymore. I am interested in the company's survival." "What is this?" Elliot asked, reaching for the binder with trembling hands. "Those are the terms of restructuring," I said. "I am offering to reinstate the guarantees. I am offering to keep the steel moving and the bank satisfied. I am offering Calder and Rowe a second chance." "At what cost?" Landon asked hoarsely. "At the cost of the illusion," I answered. I nodded to Sabrina, who began distributing copies of the term sheet to the board members. "Effective immediately," I recited. "Landon Calder will step down as CEO. He will assume the role of honorary chairman, with no executive authority. An interim CEO will be appointed by the board." "You cannot do that," Grant shouted, slamming his hand on the table. He stood up, his face flushing red. "This is our company. You are trying to steal it. You are using your little shell companies to stage a hostile takeover of your own father." "Sit down, Grant," I said calmly. "No!" Grant pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is theft. You manipulated us. You hid your assets so you could trap us. Dad, tell her. Tell her to go to hell." Landon did not speak. He was reading the document. "Grant," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. "Look around the room." Grant stopped. He looked around. The bankers were not looking at him. The independent directors were not looking at him. They were all reading the term sheet. They were nodding. They saw a lifeline. They saw a way to save their investment from the disaster the Calder men had created. "It is not theft, Grant," I said. "It is a bailout, and bailouts come with conditions." I turned back to Landon. "The trust is also being restructured," I said. "I am formally renouncing my beneficiary status. I do not want your allowance. In exchange, all capital I have injected into this company will be recognized as senior debt with attached voting rights. I am taking a seat on this board, and I am taking veto power over the risk committee." "You are castrating us," Nolan whispered. "You are taking away our control." "I am taking away your ability to be reckless," I corrected. "And I am redirecting the $2 million client relations budget to an employee hardship fund. We are done buying box seats while the site crews worry about layoffs." "This is outrageous," Grant muttered, sinking back into his chair. But the fight had gone out of him. He realized, finally, that he was not the heir apparent. He was just a line item I could choose to defund. "Mr. Calder." Henderson from the pension fund spoke up. "These terms appear to be essential for the continued solvency of the firm. The fund supports this proposal. If you do not sign, we will be forced to join the bank in reviewing our position." It was the final nail. Landon looked at the paper. He looked at the clause that stripped him of his power. He looked at the clause that gave his daughter the final say on his legacy. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. For a moment, I saw the father who used to push me on the swing set, before money became the only language he spoke. "Tessa," he said softly. The room strained to hear him. "I built this, brick by brick." "I know," I said, "and I am the one paying for the mortar that holds it together. Do you want it to stand, or do you want it to fall?" Landon closed his eyes. He let out a long, shuddering breath. He picked up the heavy gold fountain pen that lay next to his notepad, the symbol of his authority. "I accept the terms," he whispered. "Dad, no!" Grant cried out, but Elliot put a hand on his arm to silence him. "I accept," Landon repeated, louder this time. He opened the binder to the signature page. He signed his name. It was a shaky scrawl, not the bold signature of the past. He pushed the binder back toward the center of the table. Then he looked at me. "Tessa," he said, can we speak? Just for a moment? Privately? Not as chairman and creditor, just as a father and daughter?" The room waited. Ruth looked at me. Liam looked at me. They were waiting to see if I would crack. They were waiting to see if the tough love had worked, or if I would revert to the girl seeking approval. I looked at my father. I saw a man who was afraid of being alone. I saw a man who wanted absolution for 30 years of neglect because he had signed one piece of paper. I did not smile. I did not nod. I reached out and pulled the binder toward me. I uncapped my own pen, a simple black rollerball. I signed my name on the line marked Managing Member, Lila Revenge Holdings. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only sound in the world. I closed the binder. "We can discuss the transition schedule with the lawyers," I said. "This meeting is adjourned." I stood up. Landon flinched as if I had slapped him. He realized then that the separation he had asked for was real. He had wanted business to be business. He got it. I gathered my things. I nodded to Ruth. I nodded to Liam. I turned and walked toward the door. I could feel their eyes on my back. Landon, Grant, Elliot, Nolan, my mother who was undoubtedly waiting by the phone, the people who had voted to remove the burden. I walked out of the glass conference room and into the hallway. The air felt cleaner here. They had succeeded. From now on, I am no longer a burden in their trust. I am just the only person they have to call whenever they need money to keep their legacy from collapsing. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Tessa Calder. Let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I love seeing our community grow from all corners of the world. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next video.